Good evening, everyone. This is Gayle Pauley, and I will be doing the presentation this evening on the Washington's ESSA Consolidated Plan. You are the last of 4 sites where we're doing our review tours. As Tony said, we will be taking your questions, and you may certainly submit those at any time electronically. And as we go through the presentation, at the end of the presentation, there will be time for answering. We may not get through all of your questions, but we'll try to get through as many as possible. If for some reason we don't get through all of the questions, those will be recorded as well as this presentation. And we will take that information, those questions, to our internal, our OSPI ESSA plan team, and look at the questions and see if there are areas that we may have not responded to in past with information that's on our website. And we'll take any new questions and put those into a final format with the questions that we've received over the last 4 sessions, really taking a look and noting what people are concerned with and what they like and what they may not like so much. So we will work through that together this evening. We have 5 minutes of welcome, so welcome. And thank you for being here with us this evening. In the room with me are our 2 executive assistants extraordinaire, Carrie Hurt and Jamie Peterson. And when you see the last slide, you'll see their names as well as Dr. Gil Mendoza and my name. We are the key contacts for any communications that go back and forth between our public and the agency. So at any time, you're certainly welcome to email Gil or myself. And please CC Carrie and Jamie as well, as they keep us on track and making sure that we respond to all of your inquiries. Just one other aside before we get started today. As of this morning, we have information that we will be adding an additional, at least an additional 60 days for comment, public comment. And if you will watch in the morning, you will see an announcement of this. So it will be in addition to the 30 days that we have for public comment. And more information for that, the reasons behind that will be coming out in a press release tomorrow morning. Let me just go back to the agenda for a few minutes. I'm going to take probably about 40 minutes to go through the major parts of the ESSA Consolidated Plan, and then we'll have time for questions. This is from our forum, so you'll see, I wish you were all in front of me. It's much easier to talk to people than a screen. But again, as I said, please type in your questions to us and we will respond when I am done presenting. So the Every Student Succeeds Act was signed into law on December 10th, 2015, almost a year ago now. It doesn't seem like it was that long ago. It reauthorizes the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965 and replaces the No Child Left Behind Act. And this was a red letter day for all of us within OSPI, and I know out in the districts and in the communities where our students live. There were many parts of No Child Left Behind that we did not really appreciate or like, and many of those parts have gone away, and I'll go into those in just a few minutes. There are some great opportunities for us under ESSA, and I will also respond or talk to those a bit as well. So in this slide, you'll see that we have taken a look at some of the changes from No Child Left Behind to the Every Student Succeeds Act. These are key components. There are many other changes as well, but these are the components that we believe are going to impact our plan statewide. So as we look at the Every Student Succeeds Act, what is really key is that there is now an emphasis on growth and looking at the educational opportunity gaps for our students. and how we bridge those gaps and how we work together to ensure that our students are receiving the best educational opportunities as possible. So we're looking at growth as well as proficiency. And as you look under No Child Left Behind, you'll see that there was 100% proficiency, and I know many of you have seen the graphic over and over again where it said all of our kids would be proficient by 2014. This removes that, gets us beyond that, and gives us the opportunity to include growth and looking at how we bridge gaps in a much more detailed manner. One of the other major changes in the law is the focus on growth and focus on support systems for our schools. And the key word here is support, because in the past under NCLB, there was an emphasis on failure and identifying schools as being a failure if they did not meet proficiency standards. That is gone. Please underscore that. In all of the language that we have put in ESSA in our consolidated application or plan, we have emphasized that when we look at our schools, we want to ensure that they receive the resources and support structures that they need to be successful with their students and successful in supporting their teachers, their principals, the educators that they work with, and the families that have the children that go to those schools. Another change from No Child Left Behind to the Every Student Succeeds Act is how we're looking at the definition of a effective educator. That's the terminology now. It was highly qualified before. We had different kinds of systems in place to label a teacher highly qualified. The key to this now, and our key word, is effective. And there are some changes that I will go through in this in a few minutes. Another big change is the emphasis on local control and how districts can use their federal program funds to support their district and school goals for academic achievement and support structures for their young people that attend their schools. Under NCLB, there was SES set-asides and school choice set-asides required. Those are no longer required. As you take a look at Every Student Succeeds Act and what I was speaking to earlier about systems of support for our schools, we've had priority and focus schools in the past under NCLB. There were requirements that we had to meet with turnaround models. The change now is that a district, a school, and the state can work together to look at what are the best practices and improvement models and how do we implement those, again, based upon what we know about schools, what you know as a district leader, for those of you who are on the webinar this evening, for the teachers in the room, what do you know about what needs to occur for your students in your schools? So we are moving to what are called improvement models, where there's much more flexibility in how a district determines what they want to implement for those schools that are identified at this point as comprehensive and targeted schools from this point on. Under No Child Left Behind, there were sanctions, there were many, many sanctions. And those sanctions really took funds away from school districts that allowed them to provide more teachers in the classroom, more coaches for their teachers, more professional development, the resources needed for their schools. Under Every Student Succeeds Act, there's much more flexibility on how schools, districts use their title federal program funds to support their implementation of best practices for their students. These are just some key changes that I mentioned for us to take a look at. Here's a little more in depth as we look at some of the other ESSA requirements. There are some things that stay in place. So academic standards are required, and they have to be challenging, and they have to be in reading, English language arts, math, and science. The interesting part here is there's very strong language that the government, that means the federal government, may not impose any specific set of standards. States are required to look at state standards, but we determine as a state what those standards would be. Under annual testing, we must also test in grades 3 through 8, like we've always done, in math and English language arts. We must also test in high school for math and English language arts. And we also must test in science in each one of the grade spans, elementary, middle, or high school. That has not changed. That remains the same. It has to be a statewide assessment. What that statewide assessment is based upon what the state determines as the assessment that will go into place. At this point in our state, it's smarter balanced, and for this year it will remain that. And there's an opportunity to look at the impact on state assessments as we go through the next few years. Students with IEPs or 504 plans must still receive accommodations. That's not changed. Another piece that has not changed is that we may only report 1% of all students can be given an alternate test. So we need to report on how many students in the state, and it is set at a 1% rate. Participation remains at 95%. This is an interesting one for us because last year, if you remember, we sent out a letter stating that the federal government had put stipulations on the state of Washington because we did not meet this participation rate. We are working with them right now on the data from 2016, and there may be more news to come on that as we go through what that data is telling us. And there's another qualifier in ESSA that talks about really taking a look at testing and unnecessary testing. There's still the requirement to do statewide assessments, so you need to put that into perspective. But what are the other assessments that you may not need to be giving within a school district? That is what it's asking us to take a look at. Accountability measures. There are some changes here that we have not had in the past. As I said, proficiency in reading and math test scores is still required. We also have to look at high school graduation rates, and that is set at 67% in the new law. That is not going to be a problem for us because many of our high schools, the majority of our high schools, have a much higher rate than that. We also have to look at a state-chosen academic measure for grade schools and middle schools, and for us, what was selected was growth. Those are what are required for accountability measures. We also have to look at least one school quality student success factor, and I will go again into those in a little more depth in a future slide. The other component part to this is the requirement that we have to substantially weight the academic factors higher than the school quality factors. For achievement targets, we have to set what those targets will be for students and schools. They have to be ambitious goals for our young people, especially for those students that are farthest behind. And then we have to take a look, and this is where the equity piece really is strongly underscored. We have to take a look at the gaps between our racial ethnic groups and those students that are in English language arts program or English learner programs, and students with disabilities and those students that live in poverty. So those are really key component parts as we look at our achievement targets. The other piece to this is what I mentioned earlier, is that there are no federal penalties for our struggling schools. Instead, we are going at looking to how we best provide resources for these schools that may be having some difficulty in providing education for our young people to the level that we want them to be successful at. So we are looking at how we develop and implement improvement plans. That's not new. We've had improvement plans in the past. But they're specifically for those schools that are not reaching our standards. Struggling students in schools, as we take a look at the requirements here, and as I spoke to, if you have a low graduation rate at less than 67%, we have to take a look at those schools and see what kinds of supports we can put into place for those high schools. If there are schools that are struggling to meet academic indicators, we have to look to see why and determine how we can better support those schools. As a state and as districts, it's not just a state-level responsibility under ESSA. It is a state, district, and school-level responsibility. And as I said earlier, we have to take a look at the specific groups of students who are struggling and how do we better support those young people as they reach towards meeting the state standards. There is much more flexibility in the ESSA law that allows districts and schools to really look at their needs assessments, to look at their goals that they've set for their schools, their students, their teachers, and meeting the requirements that districts have set for themselves so that they meet the best, or they provide the best kind of educational opportunities available to their students. The one requirement here is that anything you put into place has to be evidence-based and to help those young people that are struggling. So with that, I'm going to move right into what are the 6 overarching components of the Washington State Consolidated ESSA Plan. These are the 6 different areas, and I'll go through each one. And as I go through, I'm going to tell you the specific areas that we had to address as we were working towards the plan. As you take a look at some of the slides, you're going to see the citation from the law. What we did in the development of the plan with our teams, our work groups, was to focus on what is required in the law. And that is what we did. We only looked at what elements are specifically required. We have a base of information that helps us move to meeting those required sections of the ESSA law. So as we look at these, there are long-term goals and measurement of interim progress. There's a section on consultation and coordination. There's a section on challenging academic standards and academic assessments. There's a section on accountability, support, improvement for schools. Another on supporting excellent educators, and this includes teachers, principals, and paraeducators. And the last section is supporting all students. This is a new section. It really expands upon the idea that as we look at what is best for our children within a school system, it is not just limited to English, language arts, math, and science. It looks at all the different content areas. It brings in to the picture how we work with parents, families, community members, and I'll go into much more detail when we get to that section on these topics. So long-term goals and measurements of interim progress. There are 3 component parts in this area that we're looking at: academic achievement, graduation rate, and English language proficiency. So as you take a look at these graphics, and I hopefully you have not have to look clear across the room like I'm doing right now at it, but as we take a look at these, this is the first one, and it is an example from the English language arts for students, the percent of students on track to standard. And so as we look at this, take a look on the left-hand side of the screen. We're looking at percent achieving, and it's a combination of proficiency and growth. In our prior graphics, it was only growth that we were showing. We're also, this is very different than what we have done under NCLB, we're looking at how we ensure, as we work with students to reach that endpoint goal of 100% of students on track to standard, and you'll see that that's on down a number of years to 2035, 36. So when we are at the 10-year mark, we're looking at that 1/2 of the learning gap is cut. And this is what this graphic is talking about. The key component here is that we are looking not just at proficiency, but we're looking at growth and proficiency and how we address the issues and support for any of the young people that work into or fit into each one of the categories at the bottom of the screen. So for our Asian students, for Hispanic Latino students, for 2 or more races, for American Indian and Alaska Native, Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, Black, African American, and white. Those are the racial ethnic groups. And then for programs, we look at students with disabilities and free and reduced lunch. We also look at our English language learners. So as you take a look at this graphic, you might have questions that we can come back to this one later and go through some of your questions on. So I'm going to move to the next graphic. This is for high school, and again, it's an example for an ELA, English Language Arts perspective. You take a look at the left-hand side, it's percent meeting standard, and again, across the bottom of the graphic, you'll see the dates. Our goal here is that by 2026, the proficiency rate for all student groups, and this is only for proficiency, this is the difference between the high school and the elementary middle school graphic. 90% of our students in 2026-27 would be proficient. And so you're going to see that there are huge jumps for some of our student populations on this graphic. We believe that students can get there with the support of our teachers and our educators across the state. The long-term goals for high school on graduation, on-time graduation. And as you take a look at this, we are again looking at a 90% rate that 90% of our high school students will graduate by the 2026 school year. And that chart keeps going, as all three have done, to at one point or eventually get to 100%. This, again, we're looking at the number of students where they are at this point and where we want them to be in 10 years. So, what does that mean for our schools that are going to be, that are currently priority and focus schools, and those schools that are going to move into eventually comprehensive and targeted support schools? This graphic shows you a timeline. Where we are currently is in the 2016-17 school year. So you'll see at the top, currently identified, those are priority and focus schools. In 16-17, that is the second year of these schools receiving additional supports to help them support their young people in meeting the state academic requirements and graduation requirements. And 17-18 is the last year's 3-year cycle of support for priority and focus schools. In that 17-18 school year, if you go down to the column to E, where it's phase 1, first ESSA identification, you will see that in 17-18, this is our first year of implementation of ESSA, and in that spring of 18, we will identify schools as comprehensive or targeted, and they would be placed into a 3-year cycle of support. So 18, 19, 19, 20, 20, 21. We've put 3 years in because we found that for 3 years of uninterrupted support, our current priority and focus schools in general are doing much better so that they have the resources to continue the support systems and services that they have in place. We have a little flexibility because we could also add, when we are looking at ESSA, a year of planning. And at this time, we are just going to stick with the 3 years of support. And more to come on that as we get into more depth and understanding of the support structures for those schools will be coming out to all of you. So in general, I could stop here if you guys have some specific questions on, if you want to, instead of waiting till the end. Are there a couple? Let's take a couple so that we can go back and take a look. So I just diverged from my plan, but I just was thinking it might be easier for us to take a look at some of the questions as we go through. Is graduation rate based on 4-year or extended grad rate? We have both. The 4 years, what I showed you in the graphic, that's what we have to report. But we're also, and again, this will come down a little bit later, but I'll state it now as well. We have a 5th, 6th, or 7th year graduation rate that we can report, and we're doing this to support our schools that are keeping our high school kids in school. And I'll come back to that in just a little bit in one of the future slides. What is the penalty for not having 95% participation rate, if I could say that right, in the state, for the state test? This will be, again, an area that we will be working on, and I'll come back to that one as well in a future slide. And so here's another one, and I think that this is a good question to be asking because we still have, whoops, sorry, I just lost it. Sorry, I hit the wrong button. Carrie is giving me back. Okay, if you want to go, yeah. As I'm looking at the penalty piece for 95% participation, there will be some future information coming out from OSPI on this, and it will be dependent upon what the U.S. Department of Education says that we have to implement for this next school year. We're in negotiations with them right now. In the future, our AAW, which is our accountability team that works between OSPI and the state board, will be defining what those would be. So more information to come on that. Let me see, Carrie. Yeah, go down just a minute. So here's the one I was starting on. So it says, I'm confused by the graphs you showed earlier. You mentioned that the 100% requirement for NCLB is no longer in place. But then you said that our goal is still to get to 100%. So let me put it in this frame. When you are working, and I'm not sure if this is a teacher or a principal or a superintendent or a community member, when you're looking at our population of students, and you say we only want 90% of our kids to get to meet the standards that we've set, what if your child was in that 10% that we did not include? And so what we've done, this is again very different from that 100% all kids on the same day will be 100% proficient. And you have the graphic in front of you right now. When we're looking at elementary and middle school, we're looking at not just proficiency, which is NCLB. We're looking at proficiency and growth, which is ESSA. And we're looking to see for those students that are on track to being to meeting the proficiency and growth standards. And so this gives us more flexibility than was under NCLB. If a student is on track, then that will be recognized and the district and the school will get credit for those students being on track. And I did not say that, so I'm glad you asked that question. And I'll take one more and then I'll move along. Okay, most of the rest of them is, they're dealing with some other areas that I'm going to get to in just a few minutes. So thank you for those questions, and I will do that every once in a while. I may not do it after each section, given the time that we have, and I want to make sure we have plenty of time for your questions. So the consultation and coordination section. Under ESSA, we have to provide timely and meaningful consultation, and that's what you're part of right now. Within the system, which we started late last winter, we have set up multiple different ways in which we've provided information out. Our first work on this were the forums that we held, and those forums, we were across the state. We asked for public input. We asked for your comments on what are the most important aspects of what schools should be held accountable for, districts held accountable for. We collected a lot of information. We also set up our ESSA website and have collected multiple facts and information comments through that site. We were just looking actually last week at how many hits that we've had on the website, and it's something like, and I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget, it was 35,000 hits. So we know that people have been using the website, and we really appreciate any of you that have gone to the site, especially and have signed up for the updates. You'll see that on this slide that you can review the consolidated plan at the website on this slide. As I said, we have done many public forums. We're doing this outreach to you right now based upon, here's the proposed plan. What do you like about it? What do you have questions about? What's something that you might want us to rethink? And as we did the plan, and this is probably a review for some of you, but this is the organizational chart that we put into place. And within this chart, we had around 304 or 5 participants working with us. They represented everyone from WEA, other teachers that were not identified by WEA on these different groups, school board members, principals, school district directors, school parents, community members. We had people from the legislature on our sites, or on these groups as well. And let me just do a quick review. The Superintendent of Public Instruction under ESSA is the person, it's cited in the law, that actually approves the plan for submission to the U.S. Department of Ed. As you see right below the Superintendent of Public Instruction, the Consolidated Plan team was a team that took all of the information from the other groups and put them into place into the Consolidated Plan. That team had members that fed into the different work groups that are listed below. Not only were each one of those work groups have members from the Consolidated Plan team, but they had many other members as well. On the side, you'll see the OSPI ESSA leadership team. That is Dr. Mendoza's leadership group. We take a look at what the process is and have, and will continue to do that as we go through the next 2 or 3 months with open comment period. The program, or the group, the work group right below is the federal programs team, and that group I worked with. That was made up of OSPI title program staff as well as district federal programs and some other entities that had a vested interest in looking at how the law was being interpreted within the plan that we were pulling together. Their major role was to make sure that anything that came out of any of the work groups as well as the Consolidated Plan team fit within the law. That there wasn't anything that just because someone liked an idea. It had to be justified by a specific section of the law. As you take a look at the work groups below, there was accountability work group, and this was led by Dr. Mendoza as well as Ben Rarick from the State Board. That is a jointly led team because the State Board has some of the authority under state law to direct and to decide upon some of the accountability system components. There was a learning and teaching team, and that team was specifically looked at standards for the state, the student assessment, looking at our assessment system. School and district improvement was led by Michael Marin, and their team is taking a look specifically at how we move from a priority and focus mindset to a comprehensive and targeted school mindset. Effective educators were led by two of our key people that work specifically with, one, Maria Flores with Title II, which is supporting educators with federal funds, and the other is Sue Anderson, who's worked specifically with state implementation of TPEP and other state support systems for teachers. The English Learners Group, the fiscal section, because there are fiscal rules and regulations that we always also had to take a look at to ensure that we were meeting those. There's some new requirements under the report card, what we have to provide to the community and to on our report card site. There was a parent and community engagement work group, and you'll see some of their work again as we go through the slides. A new piece, even though in some instances some federal program funds could be used to support early childhood, it is now much more focused and pretty much runs through all of the title federal programs that the funds could be used to help support transitioning into our K-12 system of our youngest citizens in the state from birth to age 5 before they come to kindergarten. And also our students with disabilities. You can see the names of the leads for each one of those. And as I said earlier, each work group was made up of many different voices that came to the table and worked with us for the last 10 months on what should be included into the consolidated plan. That information went from those work groups to the consolidated plan team and then to Superintendent Dorn for his review and approval. What you see in the actual plan are the areas that Superintendent Dorn has approved for inclusion in the ESSA Consolidated Plan. This is just a slide of some of the groups that are required under ESSA for us to have had included in our work, especially the Consolidated Plan team. And so as you look at this group, you'll see the governor's office, that we have our tribes in the state of Washington, the Washington State Parent-Teacher Association, the Commission on Asian Pacific American Affairs, Commission on African Affairs, Special Education Advisory. You'll just see a long list of people that we needed to include. I am happy to say that we had representatives from every one of these groups. So that's just in a nutshell our work that we have done to date. And right now we are in the process of learning more from you as you look at the plan and providing us with your questions and your feedback. So I'm going to move in to the third area, the third major group area of the plan. And this is a challenging state academic standards and academic assessment section. The bullets that you see on this section are specific to what had to be included within the plan as required under ESSA. So you'll see things like what is the alternate academic achievement standards? What are they? How do we look at English language proficiency standards? Do we have them? Do we have student academic assessments? Can we look at what the state assessment requirements are and how do we identify what those are? Do we have our tests in other languages than English? How do we use and collect data? How do we monitor our system? So these are just some of the key areas that the Challenging State Academic Standards Teaching and Learning Team, Learning and Teaching Team work group took a look at. So what you see on the slides after each one of, you will see after each one of those sections are some of the recommendations or some of the assurances. So for the learning and teaching work group, these are really more assurances that we have to provide to the U.S. Department of Ed in our ESSA Consolidated Plan. We have to state that we have Washington state standards, that we are going to implement next-gen science standards, and that we're going to use a smarter balanced assessment. So that is just, again, an assurance that we have to do. We also have to assure that the state has demonstrated that the challenging state academic standards are relevant and aligned with career and technical education standards for mathematics, reading or language arts, and science. We have to assure that the state has identified and demonstrated that challenging state academic standards are aligned with entrance requirements for credit-bearing coursework in the system of higher ed in the state. So we had, again, what I didn't mention earlier is we had members from our universities on some of our work groups as well. So they were there working with us on this requirement. We also have to adopt English language proficiency standards, and those standards have to include the areas of speaking, listening, reading, and writing. We have to look at different proficiency levels for our English learners, and whatever we do for our English language learners with the standards have to be aligned to our state academic standards as well. So those are just a couple of examples from the learning and teaching, and those are assurances. Their sections specifically, more than any of the others, were based on our assurances to the federal government as to this is what we will have in place. The next section is on accountability, support, and improvement for schools. This is a relatively large section of the workbook, work plan. I call it workbook because that's what it feels like sometimes. Our accountability plan. So this talks about the accountability system, our state support and improvement for low-performing schools, how we identify schools for comprehensive and improvement and targeted support, and then what's our performance management and technical assistance system going to look like for those schools and for LEA schools, districts in general. So here is a snapshot of our accountability system that is recommended in the ESSA plan. This is specifically for next year, for the 17-18 school year. Our phase, we're calling it phase 1. And we'll have a phase 2 for us to look at what has worked after next year, what didn't work, and how do we want to improve upon the system. This is really important to us because this is an ongoing process as we identify some new areas in which we will be working, and I will go through those in just a second. So take a look at the first row, and it's all about elementary under academic indicators. As I've said probably about 10 times already, we're looking at proficiency and growth, and we also have to look at English learner progress. Those are required for us. Middle school is proficiency, growth, and English learner progress as well. High schools, a little different. Growth is not embedded in high schools. It's a little difficult to go from 8th to 10th or 11th grade and determine growth. So that's basically why growth is not part of the high school indicators. So there's proficiency, there's the required looking at graduation rate, and English learner progress. That runs across, English learner progress runs across all 3 spans, grade spans. If you go to the second column where it talks about school quality, our student success, this is the other indicator that we have to identify for the state as one of 4 specific indicators that we implement, and as how we look at our schools to determine their success. This is generally a non-academic indicator, and we had a whole list. When the committee started working, our work group started looking at what are all of the different kinds of indicators that we could put into place. There were about 50 of them, and I think we got it down to about 13 in our next to the last meeting, and then it came down to about 6. So what you're going to see on this section are the school quality student success indicators that we're going to start the 17-18 school year looking at. So chronic absenteeism will be at the elementary and the middle school levels. Chronic absenteeism, there is numerous research articles provided that we took a look at. We looked at our Learning Assistance Program best practice menu. This is one of the areas in which there's specific research that they have cited, and then ways in which to support schools and districts in meeting the needs of students to keep them in school. And so chronic absenteeism is at all 3 levels for elementary, middle, and high school as one of the other indicators. At high school, there are 2 others. There's 9th graders on track. So this basically is how many students in 9th grade did not, that failed a course. And if there are a number of those students, then there would be a system in which we would determine that the school did not meet that requirement. Advanced course taking is another one of the areas that we will take a look at for high school. And that includes things like our courses in advanced placement, international baccalaureate, college and the high school. If we take a look at career and technical education, what could we put into the place as we look at that, and a little more on that one on phase 2. So this is, what are the opportunities that are provided for students to be ready to go into college or what other track that they're taking with some skills that they have been advanced in as they are in their high school years. Those are the key components for phase 1. Phase 2, you'll see that the academic indicators remain the same. The big difference here is when you get to the high school, and we will be taking a look at advanced course taking, but include industry certification. And that will be an area we will be working with our career and technical education staff and district administrators across the state to look at what that looks like, what it should include, how we should include that. There is another box at the bottom of this section that talks about the other indicators that we may look at that our teams recommended. And they're there because we do not have clean data at this point to really include them. We do on chronic absenteeism. We do have the data on 9th graders on track. We do have the data on advanced course taking. And it is consistent across the state, and it's pretty clean. What we don't have are the other data areas that support disproportionate discipline, teacher assignment and equity, and school climate and engagement survey. Those are the other 3 that we will be looking at throughout next year to determine whether or not we want to add them into the accountability system. So moving along, there is a requirement, as I said earlier, to look at how we weight each one of these areas. And there, in that requirement, it says that we cannot weight the SQSS areas, school quality and student success areas, higher than any of the academic areas and graduation area. So as you look at this, the teams decided, our work groups decided, that for elementary, proficiency would be rated a medium, growth high. So you can see that this is very different than what we've had in the past, again, with looking at growth at a much higher level than proficiency. Of course, we don't have graduation in elementary and middle, but we would look at our English learner progress over time, and that would be weighted at a medium to low rank. And then for school quality and student success, it would be a low rating. The percentages on this we're still working out, and that will be done with our AAW team as we work through all of the process pieces for implementation. For middle school, you'll see again, proficiency growth are the same as elementary. EL progress is at a low, as well as the SQSS area. For high school, proficiency will be a medium to high weight, graduation a high rate, EL progress low, and again, the other indicator, non-academic indicator, as a low rate. This just is in response to the requirement that we have to make that proficiency growth and graduation and EL progress is weighted at a much higher rate than the SQSS. We will identify those schools for comprehensive support based on the all-student group in combination with the targeted subgroups. This was a key factor for our teams that we're working on. What does it mean to take a look at those schools that are having challenges with meeting the needs of the student populations that they're serving? So it's in the past we looked at under NCLB, we looked at the all students group and we looked at the targeted subgroups independently. Under this, we will look at them in combination. This is really an emphasis on the targeted subgroups and how we take a look at our achievement gaps and bridging those achievement gaps throughout the work that we implement. The italicized section of this slide talks about the Achievement and Accountability Work Group. So this is the one that I mentioned earlier that is a joint group between the State Board and OSPI. This group will be, their main charge will be to work towards all of the implementation processes that we need to put into place to make sure that we are working towards meeting the components of ESSA that are within our plan, but also what are the supports as a state we can put into place as well, and what other options or opportunities we would put into our state focus. And again, this really speaks to how we are looking at weights and proportions, our calculations, to balance the importance of our historically underserved populations and not skewing outcomes for schools with large populations of those students. The high school graduation indicator, and this goes back to the question that was asked earlier, we have to use the 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate as required. That is the first line. But then what we have put in, and in previous years under NCLB, we looked at a 5th year of graduation. But now we can put in 5th, 6th, and 7th year cohort rates. And this will provide us with the information that we're really after, and that is how many students are coming back to school to graduate from high school, and putting into place a structure where we can celebrate those schools and districts that have done this. Annual meaningful differentiation, we had the opportunity to define how we were going to take a look at the system for how we would name or rate schools. If you remember under NCLB, it was a step. You were in step 1 through 5 if you were a school, or step 1 or 2 if you were a district. We wanted to get away from that, and so we have 3 different ways in which we are going to differentiate the structure for identifying schools that are having difficulty meeting the state's standards that are in place. So we will do an assignment of a 1 through 10 rating. There will be name and color coding, and if you know the State Board's index, this is exactly like their index. It's not a change for us. It's just a change in how we provide the information to the U.S. Department of Education. Participation rate, and this goes back to one of the prior questions as well. We are still required to have 95% of our students that are in tested grades participate in the assessments. And as I said earlier, the AAW will define and recommend supports and technical assistance for those schools and districts that did not meet the 95% participation rate. There's a possibility that the AAW will recommend and define tiered accountability if improvement wasn't made. We have had many conversations around this, and we know that we are still going to be held accountable, and so we have to have some kind of system in place, but we are leaving that to the AAW. So your recommendations on this, we would appreciate as well. This goes into how we actually target our comprehensive and targeted schools. So on the left-hand side, you're going to see the old system for NCLB. So what we had to do under NCLB was identify the bottom 10% of our targeted subgroups. You remember, priority schools were the bottom 5%. And we did that in a stacked ranking. So we looked at race and ethnicity and the different types of programs, and they were all ranked together. So in the outcome of that was that many of our schools that were identified for targeted support for focus groups were those schools that had students with disabilities or English learners. So that bottom 10% of that group were basically made up of schools that had populations of those two different categories, as well as our low-income students. And those are the schools that were receiving additional support services. What we have proposed is that we take a look at race and ethnicity as one category and our programs as another category, and that when you're taking a look at this chart, you're going to see at the bottom that the bottom 3 areas under race and ethnicity and programs are where we will use that information to determine who the targeted support schools will be. And so this is a little different, so that we may find out that it's not just our EL students or our students with disabilities that are our lowest achieving schools, but there may be populations of students that in the past we had not identified for additional support that were a racial or an ethnic group. A little trouble with those words, excuse me. Racial or ethnic group. So this then will provide us with those lowest achieving schools in those 2 different columns. There is a reason behind this, in that we want to make sure that we are truly identifying the schools that need the most support out of our programs funds that we have available from the federal government to support our lowest achieving schools. The difference also is that the ESSA does not define the percentage of schools. So under NCLB, it was the bottom 10%. We are trying to and working towards identifying a percentage that makes sense for our state. We won't know that until we have the data from this school year, and we can run data to determine which are our lowest achieving schools in those 2 categories. So other information under our accountability system, we had the opportunity to define who our English learners subgroup, who they are. And so what the EL group did was define English learners as those students that are learning English. Make sense? As I say this, I'm going, okay, so what this really means is, as we're looking at kids that come into our system, our school system, are the students specifically in our Title III TBIP programs. And they are young people that need additional assistance in learning the language, English language. This does not include, we have the opportunity to include students that had been in the, removed from the program. The English Learners Work Group determined that that was not what they wanted. They wanted to see who actually is in the program being served and what kind of supports and success are those young people meeting with. English language proficiency progress measure. As we look at this, we know, and we had 1 year of ELPA 21. That was last year. We need a second year, and that will be this spring. And as we institute the assessments and we gather the data, we will be able to develop an EL progress measure, and that will go into place in the 17-18 school year. We have the opportunity to take a look at advanced mathematics in the 8th grade school year, and the opportunity to determine whether or not an 8th grader that was in an advanced math course had to take the 8th grade Smarter Balance assessment. The assessment team determined that this would skew our Smarter Balance results. So if an 8th grader has taken advanced math, then they also must, in a math course, they must participate in the 8th grade student assessment, Smarter Balance. The next one I know we have a lot of districts that are really interested in, and that comes from comments from some of our work group members. As we look at the state assessment in ESSA, there's a section that says if the state determines that there are other assessments that could be used in place of the state-determined assessment, then districts could ask to be able to use that assessment in place. So the ones that are often cited in ESSA are the SAT or ACT. What we know to date about those assessments is that they have not gone through a peer review process. So the team's recommendation was that if a alternate or a different assessment for high school, and this is only for high school, goes through a peer review process and aligns with Washington State's comprehensive system of support for schools and with the standards for the state, then the assessment could be given. And there's a key piece to this, and that is where the assessment can only be given across a district. It cannot be just one high school. So what we have determined is if another state goes through the peer review process, then we will take a look at those assessments and make a recommendation through our AAW group to take a look at the alternate test and put that into place. But we would also have to have a change in state law. So there's some conditions in this area that we would have to work through if we were to allow a school district to implement one of the state or one of the other assessments in their high schools. This one talks about our alternate assessments for students with most significant cognitive disabilities. This is just, again, one of those assurances. It says that we have an assessment for those students. But what it says and what we don't have in place are the score reports in other languages. And so this is just, as I said earlier, we assure that we have the assessment in place, but we do not have the assessment in different languages. So those are the component parts of our assessment and accountability system. I think I will continue through so we have plenty of time to go through the questions, all right? So supporting excellent educators. As I said earlier, this section is taking a look at the definition of effective and what that means for our teachers, our principals, and how does this impact our paraeducators, and what are the requirements for those for the paraeducators. As you see, again on the bullets, these are the areas that we had to address within this section of the plan. Educator development, retention, and how we keep teachers within the system. What kinds of awards can we put into place for those teachers? What kind of support structures can we put into place? What kind of professional development opportunities? As we take a look at our different populations of students that we have within the state, how do we take a look at those skills that are needed to address specific learning needs? How do we evaluate the system? How do we make sure that there's great opportunities for prep for our teachers, principals, and paraeducators? There's also a section on educator equity, and this is extremely important in our state because of the diversity of the students that we serve. Our teacher principal population does not reflect the population of students that we serve, and so this section talks about how we are going to look at disproportionality of teachers that are not effective, or are teaching out of endorsement area. What can we do to support those teachers to become effective and to meet the requirements under the Educator Equity Plan, which was put into place last spring. It was approved by the U.S. Department of Education, and the work that this work team did together was based upon many components out of that report. There's also, these are continuing issues or areas that we had to take a look at: the system for performance management, how we use and collect data, how we monitor. Again, monitoring pops up a lot in this, how we are monitoring the success of ensuring that our students are being taught by our most effective teachers, and how we provide differentiated technical assistance to schools and districts across the state. So this slide is of, I think, high interest to most of us. It was when I was taking a look from the recommendations from the Educator Equity Work Group. And this is the definitions that will be used for effective or ineffective. So for teachers and principals, the definition for effective are those teachers or principals that receive a 4, which is distinguished on the TPEP, or a 3, proficient. That's pretty straightforward. This is the next area is one that we determined that we wanted to put into place. We will see if the Department of Ed accepts it, but we felt it was really, really important as a state to take a look at our teachers and principals that had only been in the profession from 0 to 3 years of their career. So we are labeling those teachers emerging early career effective if they receive a level 2 basic on TPEP. A level 2 basic after 3 years of experience will be labeled ineffective. So if, as a teacher, if you have 3 years and you receive a level 2 basic, you would be labeled ineffective. For ineffective in general, teachers and principals who receive a level 1 below basic in any year of their career will be identified as ineffective. So these are the different areas that we determined that as a state we wanted to support. We had to identify what an effective educator is, and so we chose, the work group, the team chose to use our TPEP system so that it was not a different system and that we could align the two. Paraeducators, we do not have a state law that defines what the qualifications for paraeducators should be. So we have continued to use what we used this year as transition, and that is that paraeducator qualifications, they must have the first essential credential, which is a high school diploma or GED. They do not have to have a transcript. They just have to have completed high school. That's what this slide is talking about. However, they must have, in addition, different ways that they have proven that they are ready to be a paraeducator within our system. So there's different educational pathways that they may take. They can take 2 years of study at an institution of higher ed. They can receive an associate degree or higher. They can pass the ETS Para-Pro assessment. And there's another evaluation option below, which this year is no longer in existence, but what we have said is that if a paraeducator had a portfolio or can participate in an apprenticeship program, that we would continue to honor that pathway. Again, those are for paraeducators. Another piece out of the Effective Educator Work Group was that the state is allowed to set aside funds for specific state-level activities. And that's what these next two slides are speaking to. In general, what it's saying is that those state funds will be used to support and develop and disseminate high-quality educational tools, such as classroom observation rubrics and methods, including training and auditing, ways to do those. And so tools for those will be in place, provided to school districts, provided to schools. We would also look at developing and providing training to principals, other school leaders, coaches, mentors, and evaluators on how to accurately differentiate performance, provide useful and timely feedback, and it just goes on from there. But the bottom line here is, as we're looking at what is needed, we're looking at how to develop a system for auditing the quality of evaluation and support systems for our teachers and principals across the state. We're also taking a look at how those funds that set aside at the state level can be used for professional development opportunities for principals. That we believe is a key component of how we bring about school success, and that is having highly effective principals that know how to work with teachers and with supporting their students within their school. The other area in which 1% of the Title II funds would be set aside for state-level activities is to look at developing, improving, and implementing mechanisms to assist districts and schools in recruiting, retaining teachers and principals or other school leaders. We know that this is an area right now that our districts are having difficulty with, and that's finding teachers to fill the vacancies that are in place, finding principals to lead the schools. And this is one area in which we believe that we can provide some support to districts in the state. Supporting all students, the last section, and as I said earlier, this is really taking a look at what does a well-rounded supportive educational system for students look like. So we had to address this within this section. A key area is looking at transitions for students from early childhood to elementary, from elementary to middle to high school, and then high school and beyond. That is one of the first sections written within Supporting All Students. We also have to look at how the federal program funds can be used to support strategies that we have put into place, that we're working towards building, and how those funds can be used by districts to really do what the key word here is, blend the funds to support the districts and schools' plans and actions that they want to take to better serve their students. This is a section that we will be providing more information on. In January, we have a 2-day workshop for federal program directors from districts, and we will be talking about blending funds and how those funds from Title I, Title II, and on down the list can be used with district and local funds to help support your goals and strategies for implementation. Also within this section, we have to identify our performance management systems, how we will review and approve the LEA applications that are provided to us for the different programs, and we are moving to a consolidated plan application for the federal state funds, and this will probably take us about 3 or 4 years to totally implement, but we have a process in place where we will be looking at how a district could use their needs assessment and design of their programs, implementation for Title I or Title II for migrant bilingual, for 21st century, for support for foster students, support for homeless students, how those could all be viewed, the funding from those programs could be used in support of your district or school plans and goals. We still have to monitor. As I said, I think this is now the 5th time that monitoring has come up. We still have to monitor districts. This just talks about that section and implementation of the federal programs and how that's being done. We have to look at fiscal components as well. We have to look at how schools, districts are continuously improving. And one of the big changes here is our work on how we can look at differentiated technical assistance. And when I was talking earlier about our comprehensive and targeted schools, this comes back to that a bit as well, because there are different ways and different systems that we could put into place. Identification of those will come as we go through our first rounds of support for schools. It will come through information that we receive from superintendents, principals, teachers, families, and community members, and on implementation. So those are the key components under supporting all students. Within this section, also there were requirements looking at English learners. And again, some of these are assurances, some of them are definitions. We have to ensure that the state assessments are in different languages. In our state, for mathematics, we already have some of the languages, but not all. Let's see, what is it? 213, I think, were the last count from Seattle. We certainly don't have all of those languages, all of our assessments translated into those languages, but the key languages we do. We're looking at the concept of what happens with our English language arts standards, and are there ways to help students that are not English native speakers with that assessment as well. More to come on that as we go through that process. We're looking at effective teacher and principal prep and professional development, specific to knowing and learning about how to best work with our English learners. That's what that section talks about. They're moving on to parent and community engagement. I know there are a lot of words on this slide. I ask you to go in and take a look at these in particular. The parent and community engagement work group was really concerned and had a focus on equity and social justice and civil rights. And this is a statement that that team pulled together to help guide all of our work across all of the different areas that I have been talking to you about, because in every title program, there is a line that talks about parent, family, guardians, and their engagement, as well as communities within this whole process that we've been talking about in implementation of ESSA. So just a couple of key components on this slide. To have successful schools, we have to have successful students, and that is done by having parents and communities and families work with us to look at how we can be culturally responsive and inclusive in our schools. We must look at how we recruit, hire, train, and retrain and retain all staff, and how to be culturally responsive, inclusive, and how to build family, community, school engagement processes. that work, that go beyond some of the activities that I can remember doing when I was teaching, where I just invited parents in to listen to me. That's not what engagement means anymore. Engagement means active participation and decision-making in your schools, looking at your school or district improvement plans. How are parents actively engaged with you in the development and implementation of those? So those are just some of the key component parts out of this statement that was written by the Parent and Community Engagement Work Group. They also have a few other recommendations, and what they have stated on these two action items is that the SEA, that would be OSPI, supports collection and dissemination of effective engagement strategies, that we publish those, that we have those lists available for not just school districts, but for families and community members as well, that we take a look at what has worked well and what has not worked, and look at our best evidence practices to bring those into the system and supporting schools, supporting parents, supporting community members in the work that we're doing for implementation of ESSA. The bottom one really talks about increasing transparency and communication, specifically on funding that goes to the schools for family and community engagement, collaboration efforts. This is required under ESSA, so that is an assurance that goes forward. Another section under this area is early childhood education. I think this team had probably the most recommendations. We're laughing in the room. Sorry, we can't see you. And I think it's because this is a relatively new section for all of us. We all know that early childhood is where kids get the preparation that they need to be successful in school. That's just a research fact. When kids come to school and they're not ready for school, they have there are much stronger barriers for them to be successful. So as we're looking at early childhood education, we're looking at how our K-12 system can support those students that are not in kindergarten yet. And as I said earlier, transitioning from preschool, from early childhood programs to our kindergarten classrooms is a key component of this. And how we work with all of those organizations that are there supporting early childhood, like Head Start, how we bring in technical assistance by the ESDs, our Child Care Aware, our regional offices, the Department of Early Learning, DEL, how we include them in this section of our work to better support those families with young children so that those young children come to our schools ready to learn. We have a recommendation from this group to have on our website information pertaining to pre-kindergarten programs in school districts. This is something we will be working towards. We're also looking at how federal and state funds can be braided together to support programs for these young people, what kind of practices would be most beneficial, what kind of program models would work best for these young people. There's a request or guidance from the early childhood group to provide guides for districts and private schools so that when we work with our private school partners in supporting early childhood programs, that they receive some of the same technical assistance in supporting their children from ages 0 to 5, and how we work with them to look at professional development opportunities that we have available in our public school system that the private schools could participate in to better serve those young people that they're working with. We are looking at another one of their recommendations is providing professional development, as I said earlier, and ESSA funding and how those funds can be used to support early childhood programs and activities. We're looking for a planning tool to be developed And that planning tool would help districts understand how they could use the federal funds to support early childhood. And we're also looking at the recommendation on how to work with the Department of Early Learning to identify, develop, and work with school districts to assess the needs for additional preschool opportunities that are within those districts' communities. So those are some of the component parts of early childhood. For students with disabilities, what we're taking a look at here in particular is that we want to make sure that we maximize the state's fiscal, regulatory, and reporting flexibility while maintaining meaningful accountability measures with the intent to reauthorize ESSA. There's a program process used under students with disabilities that is required under IDEA that is also now listed and named under ESSA, and that is looking at the core principles of universal design for learning. And so how we look at those core principles and incorporate them into our work within the state in general is what this section is really talking about. And again, you'll see the terminology blended or braiding funding mechanisms so that we ensure that students with disabilities have the same opportunities for learning, and that we have the opportunity to support multiple tiered systems of support for all students, but specifically for, in addition to, those students with disabilities. This goes back to the 1% limitation that I spoke to earlier, and we had a question about. And what we're looking here is that the Students with Disabilities Work Group has defined cognitively challenged, and this is the definition. I don't usually read this, but because some of you may not have a screen in front of you, I will read this section. And their definition for cognitively challenged: those students who require intensive or extensive levels of direct support that is not of a temporary or transient nature. Students with significant cognitive challenges also require specifically designed instruction to acquire, maintain, or generalize skills in multiple settings in order to successfully transfer skills to natural settings, including the home, school, workplace, and community. This is the definition that is proposed and that is within our plan. I did that one. So I am at the end of just giving you some general information about specific areas within the plan. And I went longer than I was supposed to, but we will take questions. But I want to end with this slide because we've had many questions about, well, why have you just taken 10 months to really develop the plan? Are you rushing? Is the plan done? No, the plan is not done. This is a living document. We've had many stakeholders working with us, contributing to the development of the plan. We will have many more of you working with us as we go into the implementation process, as we look at the recommendations made to the plan over the next few weeks, months, and how we might adjust the plan in some ways. So it's not a completed plan. It is a draft plan, and there will be many changes over the next few weeks as we work together. And I love this second line. It says, just as our students are expected to engage, grow, and learn, our education system must do as well. And we are expecting to learn from the implementation that we're putting into place of the plan over the next few years. It will be a continuous improvement process. We'll learn from our successes and from our mistakes. We'll make changes to those as we work together. And this, as this says, this is a start. It's not the finish. And the next two slides just give you access to where you go on our website if you haven't done that. If you want to make public comment, please do so on the public comment site. And this is our contact information for the group. So now I'm going to go into some questions. Okay, what is the likelihood that assessments could be in native languages with ELL? It isn't necessarily cognitive, but language barrier. Absolutely, and within our state, and I'm assuming that we're talking about Native American. If that's not true, let me know. When I see native languages, that's just where my mind goes, because we work with the Office of Native Ed and with our tribal schools. There's been conversation around translation. It's not in the works right now, but it's certainly being considered. So thank you for asking that question. Under ESSA section, and you give me the section number, partial attendance statewide accountability systems should not include the performance of students who do not attend a particular school for at least half the year. Is this something that the Washington State Implementation Plan has incorporated? Any opportunities that we have within the regulations of the plan and the citations in the plan, we are taking advantage of. This is one of those. So it is part of our process piece where we will address this. How will we close the achievement gap without closing the discipline gap? This does not appear to be address the systems level support and how schools will replace exclusionary discipline practices left from no tolerance policies with an instructional approach. So when we had to write or worked on, it wasn't had to, it was actually something we all agreed that was really important. When we were taking a look at the last section of student support, discipline is a key component within this section as how we address and confirm that there are practices in place that need to be changed. Also within our state rules and regulations under the Learning Assistance Program, discipline is addressed in one of our menus of best practices. So we are working towards this. I know it's not going to go away right this minute, but it's certainly important that we get away from exclusionary discipline practices. I do know that there will be a revision of some of the WACs around discipline. I can't tell you what those elements are right now, but that is in the works right this minute over the next couple of months. Okay, the next question. For example, in the case of a high school student who has not attended the same school within a district for at least half of a school year and has exited high school without a regular high school diploma and without transferring to another high school that grants a regular high school diploma during such a school year, the local district, in order to calculate the graduation rate pursuant to subparagraph, my goodness, this is going on. So I'm thinking you're asking me, how are we going to deal with kids that transfer out of school, out of one high school into another, and what happens if they're in a high school that doesn't have offered graduation? And so this is one of the component parts that is within our process procedures when we're looking at how we ensure that students that are enrolled in a high school, and specifically the one that we've been addressing is if they're in one high school in a school district and they transfer to another, how do we track that? That's part of our data system, and we can actually follow those students and see which high schools they're in. If they're not in a high school that doesn't have a graduation, I would have to go to our data analyst people to see how we do that. So I'm thinking this is a question that we will make sure is on our Q&As when we get to the point to write those. I think it's a really important question for our students that are in high school. What does on track mean if it doesn't mean at standard? So when I was talking about on track, I was talking specifically about not proficiency. Proficiency means that the student has met the standard or not. When I'm talking about on track, I'm talking about growth. So if we are looking at, let's say we're looking at Gayle Pauley as the student, and I have not, I have shown some growth within the tests that I took as a third grader and the tests that I took as fourth. So there's growth there. And then again, as a fourth grader going into fifth grade, I show even more growth. That's what we're talking about on track. So as we go through and look at student data on how they're doing from year to year, how can we look to see if they're on track to meeting the goal that we're going to set for the students for growth? And so that's just a quick answer. More to come on that, as if we had some of our data analyst people in the room, they could give you even more detail. Again, a good question. We'll get that clarified in our Q&A. Why is there no AP test fee program for 2017? That one I can answer with adamant voice. It was removed from ESSA. It was put into Title IV Part A and Title I Part A as an option for districts. They could use funds from Title I Part A. However, Title IV Part A has no funding this year. And so it was a decision made by Congress that they removed that program. I can tell you that we have some state legislators that are really considering offering up a bill that would provide funds for AP fee reduction. So you might want to take a look at what's going to come out of session and track that this year. Let's see. Did every work group have a teacher on it? I believe every work group had at least one teacher on it. And I think there may have been one exception to that, and it might have been the parent. I'm sorry, which one? I don't know. Fiscal, sorry. I knew it was not the parent group as soon as I started to say that. The fiscal work group. And so we had, as I said earlier, we had teachers that were recommended from WA. We had WA staff, but we also had other teachers that had volunteered to be part of the group. Will the support from the state look similar to the support currently provided to schools and districts with requirements to utilize the same accountability system? So I am going to interpret that question as, for our schools that have been identified needing additional support, our targeted and focus groups, as I said earlier, they will have one more year of support as is. We will have some major changes in how we support comprehensive and targeted schools. And again, those we are working out as we speak, and more information will be coming to you as we transition into the 2017-18 school year. And 2018-19 will be our first round of comprehensive and targeted schools. So more to come on that one. It seems like when you start with and limit yourselves to only addressing what is in the law, it is not a consolidated comprehensive plan. It is more compliance and regulation and not true performance assessment, school district improvement driven by systems level, triangulated, and correlated data to help school districts know exactly how to address improvement from a prevention and based perspective. So here's our take on that. What we want in the plan is what the U.S. Department of Education will hold us accountable for. We want that plan to be specifically aligned with what is in the law. And if you haven't, or if you don't know this, the Accountability Code of Federal Regulations came out this morning. So we're taking a look at what is required or what they may have changed under the accountability section for the guidance that is provided to states. So when we wrote the plan, we wrote to what is required. That doesn't mean we, as a state, we are going to stick specifically to those. Those are what the U.S. Department of Education are going to take a look at when they come to monitor us, which they do. And so our system will be including many of our state requirements that are under our state legislation that will include what the state board puts into place. So what you're seeing is what we have to do in response to ESSA. Does Running Start count as an advanced academic course? Yes. I like that one. I can answer in one word. Can you please discuss how accountability measures will be utilized and or modified for students with disabilities who have most challenging academic concerns, the 1% group? Is OSPI considering multiple measures of growth for students with disabilities who continue to fail on standardized summative assessments? Again, that is one that's in process. I was talking about specifically the limit for the alternative assessment for those students with the most challenging academic concerns, in your words. And so we do have that alternative assessment right now. We don't have others in place. It's a good question. We can take it back to our section that works with our students with disabilities section. And as I said earlier, I want to make sure everyone knows that your questions will be looked at, reviewed by our internal ESSA team, which includes members of the state board, members from our Professional Education Standards Board. And we will bring answers to the questions over time for many of these that are being asked tonight, as well as the questions that have been asked in our 3 other review tours. Will the 15-16 Achievement Index information be released to schools and districts and have this important information? I don't know the answer to that. I will have to ask our Assistant Superintendent, Deb Kame, and I have your name, so we can answer that for you. I don't have, so if you want to provide, again, go to the website or go to our contact information and ask me that question again, then I can answer you directly after I check in with Deb. When it comes to determining schools that need additional help, will the state also look at homelessness, free and reduced lunch rates to help identify schools that may need additional funding for students with disabilities, since many of these families are relocating to districts where they can afford to live? This is one of those areas that actually we were talking about today, and how we provide differentiating support to schools where they may have many more barriers than other schools. We don't have all that worked out yet, but it is in our conversations. It will be in our process pieces. Specifically, we were talking today about when we identify comprehensive and targeted schools, how do we ensure that the resources to those schools match or can support those populations of students that may have contributed to the school being identified as in one of those areas. And so we have some flexibility under ESSA that was not there under NCLB on how we could redistribute some of our funding. So again, more to come on that one. Will the state be willing to pay paraeducators within special education programs who have additional training a higher salary? I don't know. I think that's a district level decision on that one. Can you describe what the process LEAs will use might look like, involvement timeline? And I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand that question. So if you want to restate it into an email to me, and I know who you are, I'll watch for it. Would the state be willing to increase funding for special education teachers? If a teacher were to leave special ed, their salary would decrease. It is extremely difficult to find teachers willing to remain in special education when they can teach students that are not as difficult to teach. Again, this is probably when we get to McCleary and get full funding, and I'm the eternal optimist with that one, there will be some ways in which funding can be looked at by a district. In most cases, this is a district level decision. Let's see, there's a question about there are many details that are yet to be finalized. Absolutely, there are a lot of process pieces that we don't have finalized. The AAW will help develop those process pieces over the next few months. I'm sure we're going to get feedback from the U.S. Department of Education when we finally send in our plan that they'll ask us questions for clarification. That information will be part of our information that goes out to districts as well. Are these details formulated? What process is there for public input? You can provide process input at any time. That's why we have the ESSA website up. If you're looking at how we implement or process pieces for implementation and you've got some great ideas, we really would support you sending those to us. Translations in Chinese. Do we have the top 7 languages translated, and 8, sorry, and we have those on the website for a summary of our ESSA plan. So if you haven't seen those, you might want to take a look at those. Basically, we are generally just translate into the top 8, 9 languages that we have, and Chinese is not one of those, unfortunately. So, Students with Disabilities section, how will additional federal funding be available to increase professional development? I can speak directly to Title I on this one, and many of the other programs have similar language. But under Title I, students with disabilities are considered to be Title I students as well. And their teachers are considered to be, may access professional learning opportunities that a district puts into place with those funds. So there are other federal program funds that could be used also to increase professional development for teachers of students with disabilities. That's one of the areas that we will have more guidance for districts on as we complete our fiscal process component parts of how districts can use their funds to better support the students that they serve. When is the plan initially due the feds? That's part of the change in what we received today under the guidance that the U.S. Department of Ed put out. They have changed the dates. April 3rd would be the first date that they said that they would begin to look at plans. And then the other one is September 18th. And this is actually exactly what we did not ask for. That we asked for in our request to the Department of Ed when they were looking at the proposed regulations to offer dates earlier, because we know that if you wait until September 18th to send in a plan and the Department of Ed has questions on your plan and you're supposed to implement the plan in 17-18, this puts school districts, schools, and the state in kind of a precarious position. Even the April 3rd date, we believe, excuse me, as a state, is too late. So those are the dates that are actually listed in the document that we received today from the Department of Ed. I understand that LEAs will go through a process to develop local plans. When will that begin? Are there requirements for participation, especially around family and community engagement? So there are school improvement plans required by the state, so that's not new. There are school improvement plans required for comprehensive and targeted schools. So this is not a new requirement for us. And under NCLB as well as ESSA, parents and families and communities are to be actively engaged in the development and implementation of those plans. Let me see. Okay, and that's the bottom. If I missed your question, please go ahead and send it to me via my email address, and I will go back and answer if I missed any of them. And again, I would ask you to please, I'm going to put the slide back up, please provide any public comment. This is really important to us. I can't underscore that enough, because your comments are what are helping us look at our plan to make changes if that needs to happen. to make sure that we haven't missed anything that needs to be included, and to take a look at what you're thinking as we go through this process, and what are the information pieces that we need to provide you as we implement. So I have just a couple minutes more. I'm looking to see if any more questions have come in. Oh, I see one here. What are the current plans for replacing highly qualified for teaching in the middle school level with an elementary ed endorsement and for folks with special ed endorsements? Highly qualified has gone away. We are using the state requirements. And so if you meet state teacher requirements, you don't have to worry about highly qualified. Effective, as I talked about earlier, we'll go through the TPEP process and determining whether you are effective or not. We still have to report to the Department of Ed. I didn't say this earlier when I was under the educator equity section. We are required to report those teachers teaching out of their endorsement areas, ineffective teachers, or new to the profession teachers. We're not using those as anything else other than just reporting to the Department of Ed. Let me see if there's a second part of that question. What are the current plans for replacing? Okay, nope, that's all. That one I think I hopefully answered. So whatever the requirements are for you to be a teacher in special ed at the state level, that's what you have to meet in a nutshell. Is this presentation going to be available on OSPI's website? Yes, the PowerPoint is already posted. You can access it through the resources page. Sorry, I'm getting prompted on the side here. And again, thank you for participating this evening. I really appreciate it. Our team really appreciates your thinking with us as we go through this process. Have a great evening. And again, I'm thank you for the thank yous. I'm just looking at those as they come in. Again, please give us any questions that I may have missed tonight. My email is on the slide. You can provide that question to me, and I will answer. So goodbye for tonight. Thank you very much. Have a good day tomorrow.